Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and welcome to this morning's Economic Update and Annual General Meeting. I acknowledge that we are on the treaty territory of the Tsawwassen First Nations and the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Also, I acknowledge the Inuit and Métis Nation peoples who live and work on these territories. I'd like to sincerely thank the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority for their sponsorship, our Business and International Trade Center sponsors, the law firm of Gaskin, the group insurance plan represented by SNF Benefits, BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada, and Scotiabank. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of an annual general meeting is for the Surrey Board of Trade to let you know about our activities and financial performance for fiscal 2020, leading into 2021. It's a mandatory requirement as the organization falls under the federal government's Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, and is federally regulated. Yesterday, a package giving you the information that you need to participate in the AGM was sent to you if you are a member in good standing. And this will be referenced as we move through this morning's program. So we're going to start the program with our AGM, and then following the AGM is our economic update by Scotiabank's chief economist. Ladies and gentlemen, just a few introductory remarks. The Surrey Board of Trade, we are Surrey's city building business organization. We support business, bring business into the city. We are the top 10 largest chambers of commerce, boards of trades in Canada, and there's 450 of us in this country. And we've been in Surrey for over 100 years. And different leaders have guided the organization, leaving their own personal mark and their ideas, making the now Surrey Board of Trade what it is today, as well as our great city of Surrey that is going to be the largest city in British Columbia, they are now saying, by 2030. I'd like to thank and recognize the following governors, our former board chairs for joining us today. Dave Hare, our board chair from 1996 to 1997, and Bruce Hain, our board chair from 2004 to 2005. I'd also like to acknowledge just an amazing person that we lost this past year, and we weren't able to celebrate his great life. And Bill Vanderpoel, he was our board chair from 1984 to 1985. Just an amazing Surrey family, especially in the agricultural sector, and we will miss him. And he passed away earlier this year. In addition, I'd like to thank the following government representatives for tuning in today. On behalf of Member of Parliament Carrie Lynn Finlay is Anisha Virk. On behalf of Stephanie Cadieux, MLA for Surrey South, is Kieran Dhaliwal. And our City of Surrey councillors Linda Annis, Brenda Locke, and Stephen Pettigrew. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask all of you to take a moment of silence. We recognize all of the lives lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, the lives lost in our other health crisis that we're facing, the opioid crisis. And the 215 children and many others who were killed at residential schools in British Columbia and across Canada. So just a moment of silence, please. Thank you. So before we begin the formal part of the annual general meeting, we want to reflect on this past year. And I ask all of you to watch the screens for a video. I'm Anita Huberman, CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. We are Surrey's city-building business organization, making Surrey an opportunity city. During this pandemic, Surrey's business community was tested. We must face the reality that many businesses didn't make it during this pandemic. Our labor market intelligence reports state that 1 in 25 businesses shut down since March 2020. We closed our offices at the Surrey Board of Trade on March 16th, 2020. We did not know what the future held. We worked from home and we helped our members. We worked 12 to 14-hour days, and through the Rapid Response Pandemic Business Center at the Surrey Board of Trade, we helped our members. We helped Surrey's business community to ensure that we were your concierge of connections, to instigate action at the different levels of government, to ensure that you had access to the different government supports that you needed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are entering a new phase towards economic recovery. And the Surrey Board of Trade is also here for you during this phase. But let's not forget the past, because we've learned so much. Let's be bold, let's be ambitious. Let's hear from some of our industry partners on what they faced during this pandemic.
We didn't know what the future was going to look like with the pandemic. We were quite concerned, not just for my own family, but the 20 plus staff members that we employed. They live in Surrey. I know their families. Most of them have children and they all have bills to pay. So that was one of the things that gave me the courage and the energy to keep going every day.
So March 15, 2020, that's when, lockdown happened. We ended up closing for 2 weeks, and I did have to end up, laying off my staff. And that was the most heartbreaking thing for me, because oh man, because they rely on this. They need this to live their life. I wake up October 31st to an email that says I tested positive for COVID. And that was absolutely devastating. And again, we had to shut down for that 2 weeks, had to cancel everything, had to cancel all these orders that we had. We were really open about it online, on our social media platforms, and the community really, really showed up for us. And if they had to cancel their wedding cake, they said, no, you keep it. I don't need that back right now. You pay me when you're ready. I can't ever say thank you enough. I'm such a broken record on my social media saying thank you, thank you, thank you for being here.
At the beginning of the pandemic, the hardest decision I had to make was laying off my staff. They show up for me every single day. They show up for my customers every single day. They were ready to work, but to keep everyone safe, it's just a decision I had to make. Almost immediately, we were one of the first businesses to close. I made that decision. None of my bills were going away. I wasn't able to access any government assistance, so it was me in this little store. My community showed up in a way that I could have never, oh, that makes me emotional. Yeah. One of my business neighbors, he almost immediately bought a large gift card to my store just to give away. When those things started to happen is where I found some peace.
On behalf of the salmon farming sector, we'd like to thank the Surrey Board of Trade for your continued support. You were there for us in our time of need, and we thank you very much.
Thank you, Surrey Board of Trade, for helping Sunrise Kitchens during the COVID pandemic. You helped us when we needed your help.
Thank you, Surrey Board of Trade, for supporting our clients that were negatively impacted in the various industries by the pandemic. You stood up for them when they needed you the most.
Thank you, Surrey Board of Trade. You helped us when we needed it most during the pandemic.
Thank you, Surrey Board of Trade. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you wholeheartedly for guiding me through these pandemic times of how to run the business through these tough times since last year, how to get close to my clients. So I'd like to thank you again for your pandemic response, always being there for our needs as members of the Surrey Board of Trade. Keep it up, you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Well, everyone, we've learned so much during these past 16 months, and we are on a great journey to ensure that Surrey remains an opportunity city together. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask our sponsor from the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, Naomi Horsford, Acting Director of Community and Government Relations, to say a few words. Naomi, over to you.
Thank you, Anita. And thank you to the Surrey Board of Trade for being such a strong voice and advocate for businesses in Surrey. You've done such an amazing job for advocating for the voice of business in your community during such a tremendously difficult year. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, on whose ancestral lands I am speaking from today, and extend my thanks to them. It's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. As the federal agency responsible for the stewardship of the Port of Vancouver, our role is to enable trade while ensuring safety, environmental protection, and consideration for local communities. The Port of Vancouver is Canada's largest port, supporting over 115,000 supply chain jobs across the country and connecting Canadian consumers and businesses to more than 170 countries around the globe. Over the past year, the global pandemic has underscored the value of the port to the well-being of families and businesses from coast to coast. Through the pandemic, the port has been resilient. The partners in the supply chain, including longshore labor, terminals, railways, truck drivers, and many others, have kept Canada's trade moving, supplying products to people and businesses across the country at a critical time, while also maintaining strong Canadian exports to markets around the world. In fact, last year we saw trade through the port grow overall by 1%, and while some sectors such as cruise and automobiles had very challenging years, others continued to grow. Containerized trade set a new record, in fact, providing goods to businesses and people across the country, while also providing export capacity to food, agriculture, forest products, and many other Canadian exports. In fact, 25% of the value of agriculture products exported through the port are shipped in containers. It was a record year for grain exports with a staggering 24% increase. As we look at economic recovery from this pandemic, the port is and will continue to play a major role in supporting good paying jobs for families and businesses across the province and in Surrey. These increases show that even in the time of economic downturn, demand for Canadian trade is growing. And to help facilitate this trade, in partnership with industry and government, we are investing approximately $1 billion in trade and transportation infrastructure across the Lower Mainland. We are also delivering much needed container capacity at the port to address the increasing demand for containerized trade. These improvements will help ensure that both Canadian businesses as well as local companies here in Surrey and across the region can help continue to have access to goods that they need to get their products to market. As we look ahead to economic recovery from the pandemic, the port will continue to play a major role in supporting good paying jobs and access to markets in Surrey, the Lower Mainland, and across Canada. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for your support. And of course, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority has been a great partner to the Surrey Board of Trade for many years. Now, to introduce our keynote speaker, please help me welcome Steve Gaskin, Senior Vice President for BC and Yukon of Scotiabank. Steve, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Anita, and hello, everyone. I am a relatively new regional head for BC and Yukon. I recently moved here with my wife from Ontario in the fall, and I can tell you we absolutely love British Columbia, and I can also tell you that I absolutely love the growth story in Surrey. It's an amazing market for Scotiabank to operate in, and I think that's in large part to the community leadership of people, including the people attending today's session. Scotiabank's been very active in the Surrey community, making investments in new branches and branch renovations, and we actually kept almost 100% of all our branches open during the pandemic to maintain essential services for the business community. And I think one big part of the Surrey story is how it's driven in part by new to Canada immigration. And I'm happy to say that Scotiabank has been advocating and working with the federal government on programs to ensure the seamless integration of newcomers to Canada. And these programs, we hope, will allow new Canadians to fully participate in the economy. And also, I recently met with Jane Adams at the Surrey Hospitals Foundation about some investments that Scotiabank's been making there for the benefit of the community. And I'm really excited. I think it's next week Minister Dix is addressing this board, and be interesting to hear her messages. We're very proud of the long-standing membership we've had with the Surrey Board of Trade. And, you know, Anita, thank you to you and your entire team for our partnership. We know that this year has been difficult for many, and we also know that the long-term impacts of this pandemic is going to disproportionately affect many. But that said, we're very optimistic about the future, and our view is very optimistic about the future. And so I'm thrilled to have my colleague, our Senior Vice President and Chief Economist, J.F. Perrault, here and to talk about our optimistic view for the future. And JF, I want to say thank you for investing your time with us here in BC and in Surrey. And can I turn it over to you for your point of view?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. And I hope everybody can hear and see me. I'm having a few technical issues on my end, but I'm able to hear everything. So I hope everything is okay on your end. It is, you know, it was kind of a sobering reminder at the outset, the video that was shown and kind of reminding us of how difficult the last year has been. And it's really a good point of departure for thinking about where we're headed. Obviously, last year was very difficult along a number of dimensions. There were extraordinary actions on the part of governments, provincially, municipally, nationally, internationally, all designed to trying to help us get through the pandemic and with as little damage as possible. Some places were better at it than others. But it is largely as a result of some of those actions that we are thinking about the future in a very, very positive way. So I'll start off at the kind of international level, national and more local level to give you a sense of how this is filtering through, and then talk about some of the policy implications or some public policy considerations that kind of are top of mind for us and perhaps are top of mind for you as you think about engaging governments over the next few years, or perhaps ahead of the next election. So, you know, from the outset, I think the thing that is most surprising to everybody in my business is the speed at which the global recovery seems to be taking place. Now, of course, everybody thought there would be a recovery once the pandemic was kind of fading away, and there is evidence that the pandemic is fading away again, internationally, nationally, provincially, municipally. So that's kind of working out. What's been surprising though is how very quickly global demand has recovered. So as we think about global forecasts, you know, we're looking this year next at a 1-2 combination that we haven't seen in 10, 15 years. And that's a result of, you know, very positive things like commodity prices being extremely high, interest rates remaining very, very low, financial markets doing very, very well, economies reopening. All these things are acting as kind of powerful drivers of economic activity, on top of which we're still adding kind of fuel, if you look at the US, for instance, and what they're planning on the fiscal policy front. So it's really very positive global environment. In fact, the global environment is so positive that we're starting to see a little bit of some kind of negative side effects of that. And I'm sure you're experiencing that in your own businesses. And that is simply that, you know, the strength in the demand has been so quick to come that the production side of the economy has not been able to keep up. So as a result of that, you've seen, for instance, very significant increase in commodity prices, you know, lumber at record highs, copper record highs, they've come off since then. You know, delays in shipping, challenges in obtaining container space, all kinds of shortages on the consumer goods sides, and even on the industrial side. And these are all reflective of, again, the fact that we are in a much better position than firms had planned to be months ago when these kind of production decisions were undertaken. So what's happening at the global level is absolutely happening at the Canadian level as well. So as we think about Canada, you know, obviously, and this is true of BC as well, commodity prices are an extremely important driver of economic activity for us. And across the board, commodity prices are extremely high. Record highs in a lot of instances, but extremely high in general. That's very positive for our economy, as I'm sure most of you are very well aware. As I said, the Bank of Canada is keeping interest rates extremely low, even in the light of kind of higher than expected inflation, and that is obviously going to provide a cushion for the next 12 to 18 months at the very least. We have fiscal policy in Canada that's still pretty expansionary, along with what's happening in the U.S. We have this fantastic, development on the household side, which is, the support measures that were put in place last year are still to a very large degree being held as deposits in the Canadian banking system by both households and corporations. If you look at, for instance, the increase in deposits year over year in the banking system in March, so March 21 to March 20, that's about $300 billion. That is fantastically positive for growth, because usually when you come out of an economic slowdown, household balance sheets are weakened, corporate balance sheets are weakened. You've got to build those things up. We're starting a recession, starting an expansion with extremely high levels of liquidity in the banking system, which of course is going to get deployed as we move forward. So that's a very positive thing as well. And then you layer in on top of that things like wealth effects, which from a consumer perspective are really quite powerful. Equity markets have been very, very strong. We know this. Housing markets have been very, very strong. And while that's a challenge in and of itself in terms of folks trying to get into the market, trying to find a place, the reality is that increase, that kind of strength in the housing market has created a very significant wealth effect on the housing side, which is propelling household wealth in Canada. In fact, when we look at household wealth in Canada, and this was just published by Statistics Canada last week, so it's very recent data, for the first quarter, in relation to disposable income, in relation to personal income, household net worth in Canada has never been this high. We broke an all-time record, and we broke that all-time record by about 40 percentage points. So for Canada as a whole, the net worth is 933% of income. Obviously, there are distributional impacts. Less well-off people don't have as many assets. But again, it's unusual to start a recovery with this level of financial firepower on the part of households and firms. If you look at, housing equity, it's a 76.4% in Canada. Historical record as well in the first quarter of this year. The debt to asset ratio for households, the lowest level in over 20 years. So you hear about the negative consequences of the pandemic, you hear about folks having financial difficulties, and that is all true. But when you look at it from an economy-wide perspective, it's a significantly more optimistic story, right? So the household sector is really there, raring to go. And in fact, as I said, what we're observing is, shortages of various kinds of goods. Essentially, if you can buy it as a household, you're buying it, right? So cars, boats, bicycles, recreational vehicles, all these things are just flying off the shelves because consumers are just raring to go. Now, as we kind of break that down to a more kind of local level, BC is experiencing much of the same thing, right? If we think about the BC growth forecast, so we anticipate this year it'll grow at about 6.4%, next year about 4.4%. Though that combination of strength, so this year plus next year, we haven't seen since 1987, 1988. So you're in the early stages of, is likely to be the strongest economic expansion that you will have managed in your career and are likely to manage in your career. Of course, that's coming off a difficult year, but even relative to the rest of the country, the decline in BC was quite moderate. Nationally, GDP fell by about 5.5% last year. In BC, that was only 3.8%. So you're in a much better spot coming into the recovery, and you're being turbocharged by all these things that are affecting Canada, and they're affecting BC even more. So you get results like, on the employment side in BC, for instance, BC is the only province where employment is surpassed pre-pandemic levels already, right? The only province. And this is if we go back to March. I mean, we're setting aside April and May because of some shutdowns. That speaks to the dynamism you're observing here. The rate of business formation right? So the number of active businesses in BC now, so the most recent data we have for that is February, is higher than it was pre-pandemic. The only province in the country in which this is the case. So these are just kind of elements to signal that the dynamism is already playing in BC. Same thing on the business confidence side. So the CFIB produces their business barometer. Business confidence in BC is at the highest level since early 2018. It captures all of these things. Now, it's not to say that everything is hunky-dory. Of course, it's not. Right? We are still dealing with a pandemic. There still are restrictions on business activity. There still are containment measures. Borders still closed. These are all things that are weighing on the economy, and they're weighing on certain parts of the economy more than others. Right? Anything in the food and accommodation business, anything in the travel industry, well, those places aren't back to where they were pre-pandemic. We anticipate that they will be, but they're not there now. So employees in those sectors, business owners in those sectors are still struggling, and they will continue to struggle until we reopen. So obviously, a lot of the dynamism that we anticipate is a function of when the economy reopens, and clearly we're on path for that to happen. I mean, there's a 3-phase plan in BC, or I guess the 4-phase plan in BC, which is moving along quite well. So we're quite optimistic on that front. But there is still this part of the economy that's affected. I mean, just to give you an example, tourist inflows into BC, so foreign tourist inflows into BC were 2.5. So this is March data. Were 2.5% what they were in March 2019. Tourist economy in BC is worth like 3.5-4 percentage points of GDP. It's like 5 to 6% of employment. That sector is definitely being held back. But when we reopen, when we get back to, we multiply the number of tourists that are coming in by 20, 30 times relative to where they've been, you can easily see how you are much more optimistic about the second part of the year or 2022, depending on when we reopen and when those things happen. One of the things that the pandemic has revealed, though, is despite the fact that the labor market has come back quite dramatically, it really has kind of indicated or revealed some pretty serious inequities in the way various groups of people are affected by the pandemic. So there was the element of which business you're in, but also there's a big gender element. So if you look, for instance, at male employment in BC, it's basically back to where it was pre-pandemic. Female employment is still down 2.5% relative to pre-pandemic. That's a problem. And it's a problem policymakers are working on. And same thing with participation rates. So participation rates are the fraction of people that are either looking for work or unemployed. So, the number, what we call this a labor force, so in relation to the population, the people are engaged in the labor market relative to population. The female participation rate is down over 2% relative to the pre-pandemic level. For men, it's about the same. So there are still these lasting effects, or at least these observable effects, in terms of the gender composition of the recovery, which is worrisome. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes in terms of where things might take us. But generally speaking, if we kind of step aside and compare this year to next year or next couple of years to the last year, we're in an entirely different environment, really kind of a historic environment of opportunity, one in which firms are almost certainly going to thrive, or at least the conditions will be there for that to happen, particularly those that are aggressive in pursuing opportunities that can look to the future a little bit and be less constrained by kind of the economic or financial impacts of last year in terms of their ability to capitalize on that. But, in order for that to happen, you need to be able to hire folks. People need to be willing to work. People need to be able to come and live in Surrey, live in Vancouver, want to move there, want to do business there. And that's an area that is, a little bit of a challenge as we think about the state of the world going forward. And one way in which is a challenge is very clear: the housing market. The housing market, as you know, has been fantastically strong all across the country. Vancouver, Surrey, no different than almost every other part of the country, which is an exception. Usually, your part of the country is better than everybody else. Last year really saw kind of this broadening of the geographic base for housing. So on the one hand, that's fantastic for homeowners, but as I said, it does make it difficult for people to get into the market. So it can be a break on a country, like a municipality's ability to develop and grow. If you can't get people to come in, this place are too expensive. And there we know that the main challenge in BC, in Vancouver, in Surrey, and other parts of the country is related to the supply of housing, right? We have not built enough homes given the increase in population we've seen in the last 5 years. And then when the pandemic comes along and we lower interest rates and people want bigger places, they want a place out in the country, they need to study, this additional demand that's created really kind of creates these very challenging market conditions. But all that's rooted in our inability to build enough places. And this is not a homeowner versus renter thing. This is simply the number of units that you need to live. And in fact, we published something on this, I don't know, about a month or so ago now, looking at the number of housing units in Canada relative to population and compare that to other countries to see, where we stand. And from a G7 perspective, in Canada, we have the least amount of homes per capita of any other country. In some cases by quite a bit. And then when you break that down nationally, you look at various cities, BC is well below the Canadian average as well. Sorry, Vancouver's or the GVA is well below the Canadian average as well. So the problem is acute. And it's a problem that can only be solved by policymakers. It can only be solved by municipal politicians, provincial politicians, to a lesser degree, federal politicians, freeing up the supply response to the strength of the demand. We need to be able to build more and build more rapidly and build more cheaply. And there, to the extent that you can put pressure on as a business community to make that happen, we're all going to be better off, and you're going to be better off at the end of the day. That's one aspect of the housing decision. The other aspect is we as a country are homeowners. We own homes more than we rent. And of course, as things become less and less affordable, if we don't manage to increase supply, prices are going to keep going up. Canadians, Vancouverites, British Columbians are going to have to rely on the rental market more. And that's something that we can also facilitate from a policy perspective. For instance, in building purpose-built rentals, which basically aren't getting built almost anywhere these days. So again, pressure that you could put on policymakers to try and make that happen, facilitate that transition, will only make Surrey a more attractive place to live. Will only make it easier for you to recruit and retain people. Will only make it easier for you to do business. So that's one thing. The other thing to keep in mind is, again, a lesson flowing from the pandemic, and a lesson that's still with us in the sense that women have been far more affected by the pandemic than men. It's kind of brought to light this issue of childcare, the importance of childcare. And here, the BC government is well ahead of a lot of other provincial governments in this space, right? You have this commitment to $10 a day daycare. You're well ahead of provinces like Ontario, actually most of the country. So, you're heading in the right direction. But the reality still is that, the average cost of daycare in Surrey is about $1,000 a month. In Vancouver, it's about $1,100 a month. These are still prohibitively expensive for a lot of families. So as a result, you have in British Columbia, and I don't have city data for this, a greater gap between the participation of men in the economy and women for kind of 25 to 54-year-olds relative to the rest of the country. And that's, again, an opportunity for you. If you're able to, put pressure to accelerate greater support for childcare, if you're able to, force a better conversation between the federal government, which is committed to a national childcare plan, which is putting $30 billion into this, and the BC government to accelerate any of these changes, to accelerate the impact there is on childcare, you're looking at a situation where, again, this would be a way for you to develop a competitive advantage over other cities or other parts of the country, because you are well ahead as a province in this front compared to just about everybody else. And that's something that I think you as a business community, and we certainly as a large company in the country, have been making a lot of noise about. And those are the two, I think, the single two biggest things you can do in the short run to try and crystallize the benefits that you have, to build on the experience of the past, to build on the experience of the pandemic, to capitalize on your strength. Because I think we're at a time where politicians are very responsive to this kind of pressure. They know that housing supply is an issue. They know that they need to move on childcare. They're not necessarily feeling the pressure that the business community could fully deploy on that, but they understand that. And even more importantly, at the federal level, there's going to be an election almost certainly this year. So, the time is really, really ripe to kind of push them on this. So I'll leave you with those two thoughts. I mean, there's a lot of other things we could talk about, and we're running out of time, but keep in mind that there are a couple of things we can do on the policy side, and out of a range of things that we can do on the policy side. But all that is to build on what is already kind of cooked in terms of extremely strong growth the next couple of years, probably the best you're going to see in your careers. Upside to that, in an environment where interest rates are going to be really, really low. The counter to that is for the next few months, probably till the fall, we're still going to be dealing with supply challenges because growth has just come back really, really quickly, and we haven't yet adjusted to the strength in growth. So input price pressures, supply chain problems until the fall, hopefully, perhaps a little bit sooner than that. But that is a reflective of a really exceptional set of economic circumstances that are laying the foundation for a very, very strong next couple of years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jean-François, for the economic update. And certainly, British Columbia is faring better than any other province or territory in our nation. We have a lot of challenges and opportunities upon us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have many events, many initiatives, many programs into the summer and into the fall. Check it all out at businessinsurrey.com. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for the sponsorship of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Make it a great business day.